Before we get started, I always like to honor two groups. The first group I'd like to honor are the veterans. If you're a veteran in the group, please stand up and let us give you a round of applause. Thanks for what you do. Thank you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for being here. Second group I want to recognize, Pete's ahead of the game here. All these guys in the back, see, they're used to my spiel. The second group I want to recognize is the museum docents. So if you're a museum docent, stand up. These are the folks that truly make the museum special. All right, thank you. All right, without further ado, I'm going to call my friend Dr. Dave Thompson up to introduce our speaker. So please give him a warm welcome.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Out of curiosity, would all hardcore Philadelphia Eagle fans please raise their hands? Keep them up. And now, who will be, keep your hand up, you hardcore, and who will be rooting for the Eagles next Sunday? Okay, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 or 12. Okay, will all Kansas City Chief hardcore fans please raise their hands? Oh, okay, we got more. About 5 to 1 there. And keep your hands up. And who will be rooting for the Chiefs? Okay, so I think the Chiefs, I'll score them a little bit. That's probably what's going to happen during this game, unfortunately. But anyhow, I think this program you guys are all going to enjoy, and I know all football fans will. Todd Anton is the author of When Baseball Went to War and When Football Went to War, and has been a history instructor for over 30 years. His ability to work closely with students and World War II veterans had earned him national recognition. He has an extensive oral history collection of nearly 5,000 involving combat veterans from World War I until now. As a son of a World War II veteran, Todd has been inspired on a personal level to honor the greatest generation. Speaking of the greatest generations, any World War II veterans in the audience? If you are, please stand. This is Pete Bahana, one of our longtime docents, and he was in CB with the Navy in the Philippines during World War II. Thanks, Pete. Okay. Todd's father, the late Wally Anton, after returning from World War II, started for Chaffey College, playing in the Junior College Rose Bowl. Now, Football Went to War brings amazing stories from the life of the college ranks and the NFL. This book right here that Todd will be talking about, which is out of print, but most of you, and there may be some in the back, he put together some excerpts from that book. Mr. Anton is also a battlefield guide for D-Day memory tours with veterans of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Division, and has served on the Board of Trustees for Stephen Ambrose's National World War II Museum in New Orleans. He has also advised on multiple movies and appeared on ESPN, Fox News, and Yahoo. Todd lives in Victorville, California with his wife Susan and their 2 children, and continues to teach American history. So welcome, if you will, Todd Anton.
I got to use the mic this way because I'm not going to hunch over on it. So it's wonderful to be here. I hope we learned a lot together today. I'm not going to anchor to the podium. I'm going to walk around. Doing the teacher thing is people are more engaged with you when you're walking around anyway, and you don't feel like you're being lectured to. You feel like you're being included in this conversation. And that's what I want to have with you today is a conversation, because I was born and raised and not too far away from here in Yucaipa. All right, I went to Yucaipa High School, graduated in 1982. My dad was the sheriff in the town. And you might remember my sister. She was a singer celebrity. Her name was Susan Anton, if you remember her from a few years ago. All right, and I was the oops baby in the family. You know, they were all born, and she was born in my brother Greg was born in 49, she was born in 50. I was born, my brother Brent in 54, my sister Peggy, 57, I was born in 64. So I thought my name for most of my life was not again, but my name is Todd, so I'm happy to be here. But when I grew up surrounded by my dad in World War II, one of the things that started me along, and if you go to the next slide, one of the things that started me along my path was attending the movie Saving Private Ryan with my dad. My dad was a combat veteran, ETO, in Europe in World War II. He did not land at Normandy, but he fought in the general vicinity and worked his way inland. But nonetheless, my mom and dad went and saw it together first because he wanted to see if he could handle it or not. And we went and saw it again with my brother Brent and myself. My dad sat in the middle of us with his arms around us. And he was holding over our shoulders really, really tight. Because he knew it was coming. We hadn't seen the movie, but we knew it was coming. Now, my dad never talked to us about his time in the war. My dad always said the ones who did the most say the least. And the ones who talked did nothing. So he always encouraged me to date quiet girls. So that's what he said to do. But anyway, we watched the movie ended. And he said, "Take me home." So we went out to the car at the Redlands Theater here in town. Well, I keep thinking I'm down the hill, so I feel like I'm home. But we went to the Redlands Theater. My brother went home in his car. And for the next 6 hours, we sat in the car and he told me everything. And he said, you know, "I bet you wonder why I didn't hug you as much, I didn't love you, touch you as much and all that." And he said, "Because I thought everybody I loved in Europe died, and I thought if I did that with you, I'd lose you too." And I said, "Can I share this with my sisters?" And I did. And when I got a hold of my sisters, and then they said, "Oh my God, I thought it was me." And it was through that experience of seeing the humanity of my dad and seeing my dad as the scared 19-year-old, 21-year-old kid that he was, that made me understand the impact that serving your country and serving a higher call has for all you veterans out there. God bless you, and God bless your families who support you too, your wives, your children, and everybody. Family serves together, we really do. And I really appreciate this opportunity to be with you here today. Now, how did this start? Well, Dr. Stephen Ambrose, who runs the World War II Museum, didn't start with the World War II Museum. He started with the Eisenhower Center for American Studies, which was where they were collecting all the interviews that he was doing with the Band of Brothers and everybody with, if you're familiar with him, he interviewed all these veterans and recorded it. Well, one of those nights where I was suffering insomnia, I couldn't sleep. I turned on TV and I said, "What will make me fall asleep?" So I turned on C-SPAN. And so I was watching C-SPAN, and there was this Stephen Ambrose was talking about his upcoming book, Citizen Soldiers. And he was talking about that, how he's collecting interviews. And I thought, well, I know a ton of World War II veterans, one in my house. And anyway, so I got a hold of the Eisenhower Center and said, "Hey, do you need any help?" And who was it that answered the phone but him? And he's like, "Well, why don't you do a few interviews and send in your cassette tapes back then? Send in your cassette tapes and we'll see what you can do." And I sent my cassette tapes in. I interviewed a gentleman who with the last name of Farquhar. If you're familiar with Redlands, they have the orange industry in there, the Farquhar industry. He was held by the Japanese in captivity for 3.5 years. He went around, I think, 200 pounds, came home 98 pounds and everything. But Farquhar was his last name. And then obviously I interviewed my dad. And then he called me back and said, "When do you want to start?" And so from that time on, so now I've interviewed close to over 5,000 World War I to World War II veterans, and then all the way up to present day. And I did that. And then he asked me to be part of the board of trustees for the World War II Museum. And through those experiences and telling the stories to students, because a museum like this or a story like football or anything like that won't last unless you have somebody that's transmitting the values of duty, honor, country, sacrifice to our children in the classroom. It's not happening, you guys. We need to make sure that we have teachers in the classroom that respect our flag, love our country, love our veterans, and learn the principles of our founding and embrace them as heroic as they truly are. And I really believe that is true, to be true. So, Tom Hanks. So when Steve Ambrose asked me to come out to the dedication of the World War II Museum, in year 2000, on June 6, 2000. So yeah, of course I'm going to go. And so we were out there, and we had this dinner, this big gala dinner. And I was totally intimidated by it because the plates, it was $5,000 a plate dinner, and you had Secretary of Defense Cohen there, Steven Spielberg and his wife, Tom Hanks, Rita Wilson, his wife, Tom Brokaw was there at that table. So I'm looking at that table. There's a lot of power and influence there, and a lot of the donors who had donated millions and millions of dollars. And here I am, a public school teacher with cassette tapes. I just you talk about filling out of place, and I fell out of place. Well, they give you one of these posters of the dedication of the museum, and I saw people I know that were affluent. They were going and getting Steve Spielberg to sign it and Tom Hanks to sign their posters, and I'm like, well, I'm going to go do this too. So I went over there, and they were signing the posters for me, and Steve Ambrose grabbed my arm and he said, Tom, this guy caught my bug. He's doing what I'm doing, interviewing veterans and all that type of stuff. And Tom Hanks looked at me and he goes, who are you? What do you do? And I'm looking at Tom Hanks, and I have to explain what I do. And I said, I'm just a public school teacher. And he goes, well, what do you want to do? And I just felt awkward because I didn't feel that the institution of being a public school teacher is respected as being Tom Hanks. I just felt out of place. He goes, what do you want to do? And I pointed at Steve Ambrose. I said, I want to do what he does. I want to interview veterans, and I want to write about the story, but I want to write it about a way that's going to transmit it so people will understand it. Because when you get into the military jargon, a lot of people don't know, a forward observer from a tight end. They don't know that. They just know that real people, that kids served and sacrificed, and what was it like. And a lot of us always ask, could I have done it? And everybody I've interviewed, from Ted Williams to Bob Feller to the football players we'll see here now, say, absolutely you could do it. Absolutely, because there's no other alternative but to do it. And so I was talking to Tom Hanks, and I said, I want to do what he does. He goes, what do you think that takes? I said, I think that takes graduate school and a PhD and all that, and I just don't have the money. I have 2 kids and teaching. And Tom Hanks goes, so what you have are dreams and it's excuses. What's it going to be? And I'm like, I was kind of mad. I'm like, that's kind of rude, But Steve Ambrose grabbed my arm, and he said, he's challenging you. Don't get upset. I'm cleaning up the language, but he said, don't get upset. Take it for what it's worth. Take it. So I said, okay. So I went and wrote my first book, No Greater Love, and Life Stories for the Men Who Saved Baseball. And I wrote that book and interviewed all the players and everything that I could. Bob Feller, Ted Williams, it's just Jerry Coleman, Yogi Berra, all these great guys and their stories. And I wrote the book, and so the front, and I sent the first book that I gave when I published it. The first book I gave to my mom, because my dad passed away. My dad died on All Days, June 6th, D-Day, 2002. But I published the book, gave my mom the first copy. The second copy I gave to Tom Hanks. I sent it back to him. I said, dear Tom, is this good enough? Todd. He ripped that paper out and sent it back, and he said, no, this is not good enough. A dream is something that you live, not something that you do. Let me know when you know the difference. And you hear it, Kobe Bryant talking about it. Kobe Bryant says it's not the championships, it's the experience that bring you together. You talk about the Dodgers who won the World Series this year, huge Dodger fan, so go Dodgers. But then you talk about the season, and it's that camaraderie, it's that experience that brings you together. And then you also realize too, and one of the things I really appreciated about Pat Tillman, and as Pat Tillman said, to never, ever refer to football as going to war. Or we're going to war with each other. We're going to never refer to a game as a war. That's ridiculous. And of course he would know that, and everything, but he said so. So we're going to get into that. I just wanted to kind of set up where I interviewed thousands and thousands of veterans, but I have my students doing it too. Every year my students host a veterans dinner. We get about 1,000 people to it. And my students raise the money, serve the food, eat with them, and talk to them, and get to know them. The first dinner that we had was great because there was this lady, she was a battlefield nurse in World War I, and she kept talking about that Dan Wilson who got us into the game. And my kids are going, are you talking about Governor Wilson? And she's like, no, Woodrow. And my kids are like, she knows who Woodrow Wilson is. And it just shows you generationally how connected we really are. And how, we all know in this room, high school was 5 minutes ago. And so with that, I'd like to start telling you a story. Now, how did I go from the classroom to Fenway Park to Green Bay's Lambeau Field? I listened to Tom Hanks. If there's something that you want to do, there's something you want to achieve, then find somebody who's doing what you do, and they'll guide you there, they'll get you there. And that's what I've been trying to do all along. All right, let's go to the next slide if you could, please. All right, World War II. Its impact in the National Football League and its players. If we take a look, over 1,000 served, but 500 of those were NCOs or officers. Baseball had people that served, but I want to make something really clear here. Let's not forget how young football is. Football started in 1920. Baseball started in 1876 in the National League. 1901 for the American League. So you take a look, baseball's been around a lot longer than football has. Football started in 1920 in Canton, Ohio, right? That's where the Hall of Fame is. That's why the Hall of Fame is there. But if we take a look here, we see that 21 NFL personnel were killed in action. 3 of them earned the Congressional Medal of Honor. All right? And it's to them I wanted to tell these stories today. So we go to the next one if we could. All right, on December 7th, 1941, we take a look. The football during World War II, the Kennesaw Mountain Landis, the commissioner of Major League Baseball, wrote to President Roosevelt saying, is it appropriate to play baseball during the war? Is that inappropriate? Shouldn't we suspend operations and support the war effort? And then Elmer Layton, the commissioner of the NFL, also wrote a letter to Roosevelt. Roosevelt said, absolutely not. You are continuing your season. You are going to play the season. The people need you. We need to show continuity. America doesn't stop for anything. We're going to continue baseball. We're going to continue football. What he failed to tell you is that the quality of the sport you're going to see was terrible. Just because their players were really pretty much gone. All right? So the impact on World War II wasn't just that we had young men serving far away and giving up their career. Let's remember, they weren't making all that much. Especially, even Major League Baseball players and football players had part-time jobs. If you remember the play Damn Yankees, there's a scene where they're selling insurance in the dugout because they had to supplement their income. And you can imagine that today. I can't imagine that today. But anyway, that's on Sunday, December 7th, 1941. You had the New York Giants were playing Tuppy Lehman's day. Or you had the Giants were playing the Brooklyn Dodgers. Not too many people know the Brooklyn Dodgers were a football team as well, not affiliated with the ball club, but affiliated with the Brooklyn Dodgers. And we'll get into that later because the irony of the Dodgers is so fun to talk about. But Tuppy Lehman's was playing there and they broke in to the middle of the game and said, we interrupt this program to let you know the Japanese are right on Pearl Harbor. We're in the middle of that game. So that magazine, that program, I have that program. It's pretty cool to have because that's the last few hours of innocence that we had before it all changed. Like September 10th, 2001, right? It's that day before everything changed. You can go to the next slide. All right, now, players enlisted in the military, there are massive player losses, as I said, and they replaced them with retired construction workers and auto shop workers and things that were playing that just picked up and played in the game. So, here, you big, wear a uniform, because everybody else was gone. And then impact on the teams. Many teams, like I said, had to field replacement players. And then MLB is the favorite son. Now, the United States government protected Major League Baseball with an antitrust exemption. NFL was not protected. NFL was just like, you're on your own, boys. And it was like, okay, remember one season, they only fielded 8 teams. The Rams had to cancel operations. Teams were going broke and they had to combine. We'll get into that in a little bit too. Can you imagine the Eagles and the Steelers combining teams, which they did? They call them the Steagles. All right, we'll get into that. But all through this, you go to the next slide. All through this is the commissioner of the NFL holding it all together. Now, if you guys watch football, you'll notice that the Chicago Bears have GH or GSH on the side of their sleeves. GH, and that's for him, George S. House. He also served in World War I. He was the head coach of the Chicago Bears. It was during World War II, and he's like, hey, my country needs me. He left his own team to go serve in World War II. And so if you take a look, a lot of people don't know just how, they don't make guys like that anymore. He's just amazing. He gave up his career in football, he gave up his career in coaching, and he took the I should say, the Chicago Bears to heights they haven't been in a long time. All right? Like I said, the Cleveland Rams changed they just canceled their whole 44 season. They couldn't afford it. In fact, they went down and only played 8 games. There were only 8 teams. The NFL was holding on by its bootstrings. The NFL was this close to collapsing as an entire organization, as an entire league. Go to the next one. Now, I'll get back to the commissioner in a little bit. Now, we're talking about the Brooklyn Dodgers football team. Dan Toppy, the gentleman up there to the top right. Dan Topping owned the Brooklyn Dodgers. Well, the Brooklyn Dodgers team did not do very well. But automatically our minds think of the team, the baseball team. Dan Topping was just going broke. He wasn't making any money. So Dan Topping, the owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, sold his football team. And he took his money in the late 1940s and bought a team called the New York Yankees. And we all know what he did with that. All right? And he became one of the most prolific owners in all of football. In fact, jumping into baseball for a second, he had Jerry Coleman kidnapped from Korea and flew him back just so they could beat the Red Sox in the 1953 playoffs, because the Red Sox were catching up with them. So he got on the phone to the Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps and said, "We need Jerry Coleman." Jerry Coleman was back. And Jerry Coleman did not want to go. And Ted Williams kept telling him, "You lucky son of a gun." All right? But Dan Topping, and he served in World War II as well. But I just wanted to mention that story because I don't think too many people know the Brooklyn Dodgers football team. I think that's kind of interesting. You can go ahead and go on to the next one. Now, if we take a look, the economic pressure, during the war, everybody knew they had war bonds. 5th war bond, 6th war bond, 7th war bond drive, and all these kind of things to raise money. Now, the government made a deal with NFL that we will not hold you to the same restrictions, travel restrictions, as stringent as civilians, but we will control you. And we will allow your league to continue as long as you raise money for us, for the war effort. Baseball was doing that too, but baseball was protected. Also too, some of the baseball players were protected. They didn't want Joe DiMaggio to get captured on Corregidor. They didn't want, Ted Williams to get captured. You think of the public relations that would do for the Germans or for the Japanese if they caught them. All right? So baseball players were pretty sheltered and protected. Football players, not so much. Because football seemed to be a blue-collar sport where everybody just said, college football was okay. The Tom Harmons out there, number 98 from Michigan, that was okay. But NFL players they're just, baseball's so elite. Football players are just thugs. Those are the bullies in high school and all that kind of, they didn't treat them the same way. And football was suffering from an identity. They didn't feel, remember, they were only, 20 years old, 21 years old at the time, when this is an organization. So they had to make a deal. And let's get to that picture I have there. You have the Steelers Cardinals, which they combined organization, and versus the Chicago Bears. So they call them Chi for Chicago, Pitt for Pittsburgh. Chi Pit is what they call them. They were a horrible team. Chi Pit was actually referred to as carpet because they laid down for everybody. And so that's what they called them. So the Chicago Cardinals, and you had the Steagles, you had the Eagles, and you had the Steelers that joined forces called the Steagles. And they actually had a few good seasons. But it's always fun to watch the Steelers and the Eagles play against each other. Even to this day, there's a bitter rivalry. And it's not just because the cities or the Philadelphia fans, it's because there's a history that goes on with that. The Eagles say, you wouldn't be with anything without us, Steelers, and the Steelers say, you wouldn't be anything without us, Phillies, so shut up. That's just kind of how it goes back that way. But that happened, and it's remarkable to see. If you go to the next slide, I think I'm going to make my case here for Frank Layden. Yes. Now, the commissioner of the NFL, Elmer Layden, was the one trying to hold this all together. The commissioner of baseball during World War II was Kennesaw Mountain Landis. That guy's legendary. Everybody knows who Kennesaw Mountain Landis is. But Elmer Layden, he was the one holding it together. He was even using money out of his own pocket. He was trying to take bank loans, took his house loans, taking money wherever he could find it from businesses to invest in the NFL to hold it together. So when the boys get back, we'll have a league again so we can play again. He's holding it together. And he's not in the Hall of Fame? There would be no NFL today without him. If there's anything that I wish that I had a purpose to do or anything like that, would to make sure that Elmer Layden gets in the Hall of Fame. His family, his children, grandchildren, everything are trying to get it in, but trying to get him noticed. But people are like, who's Elmer Layden? Like, you would have nothing today without him. So that's my little crusade today, is to keep it going. He was, I'm getting there. Yeah, Elmer Layden is one of the 4 horsemen of the Notre Dame. The famous Fighting Irish. Notre Dame is one of the famous 4 horsemen of Notre Dame. Absolutely. He's in the College Hall of Fame. But that's because of his Notre Dame career. All right? But he held the NFL together. And he said, I can't do this anymore, and he resigned, right? Like 1946, he said, I'm done. And so, but football would have nothing without Elmer Lee. I write a letter to the Hall of Fame in Canton all the time. When I went to the Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio, when I was doing my research for when football went to war, I mentioned that to them. They said, well, we're not part of the committee or anything like that. And I said, well, let me get a hold of the Veterans Committee. So every time I try to get a hold of the Veterans Committee, you know how it goes. Oh, this is important to us. We'll get back to you, which is, you know how that means. That's like when your mom and dad told you maybe. That just meant no, right? So I'm still working on that. We can go to the next one. That would be great. Now, this is one of my favorite guys, even though he didn't play professional football. This is one of our Medal of Honor recipients, and you'll see why later on. But obviously, if we take a look, many of our players they served two lives. There's the professional football, and then there's the military life. The training camps were run by people like Joe Foss and Bob Feller and well, even later on, Roger Staubach helped run training camps in a military way to treat these kids and bust them down and make them back up. Not in the military way, but they did it in the football way. There's lots of training camp footage of soldiers, kids pushing around, not sleds, but pushing around Jeeps. You know, and it's impressive to see the fact that they could pick the Jeep up and carry it 20 yards. It's kind of cool to see that. All right, go ahead and continue on. Now, another thing that people don't know about, if you've ever seen A League of Their Own, the women's all-professional baseball team, they had a women's professional football. And a lot of people don't know that. And one of the women's professional football teams was located in Palm Springs, right here. And they played. And they played hard, and they played tough. And I just think a lot of times people didn't know that. And so we always think of the Tom Hanks movie, there's no crying in baseball, there's no crying in football either. Some of you out there producing, this would be a great story to tell. This would be a great story to tell. Let me go ahead and go on to the next one. You can see some of the teams of these young girls. And it's starting to become popular now, especially with flag football leagues that you see developing. You see commercials for girls flag football during a lot of the football games. So I just thought I'd share that with you right now. Okay, so football's most forgotten game. The Eagles are playing on December 7th, 1941. They're playing the Redskins, and it's Georgetown Day, and they're playing. What was going on the day the war started? So I'm going to share with you what I did for Yahoo Sports, and I'm going to let that tell us that story right now. And approximately 250 miles northwest of Oahu, the Japanese task force in 6 aircraft carriers launched their 150 planes of their strike force to attack Pearl Harbor. Everybody on the East Coast of the United States was excited because there were football games that day. Of course, you had the Washington Redskins hosting the Philadelphia Eagles at Griffith Stadium. The games all started at 2 o'clock. The first bombs started dropping on Pearl Harbor at 7:55 a.m. At 8:05, the famous USS Arizona was destroyed and sank in 9 minutes, killing over 1,000 of its crew. Nobody in the football stadiums knew, the audience didn't know. There was no instant communication like we have today. When that message reached the War Department, and they got that approved, they released the information out for public consumption, which would have been approximately 2:25, 2:30 East Coast time.
The White House has just announced that the Japanese are attacking military and naval establishments on the island of Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands.
And so the press box all got notified. The PA announcers at all the stadiums were notified, and the announcements went out. Well, all military personnel, please report directly and immediately to your duty stations. This is not a drill. And it went through the whole game that way. And when all duty personnel were ordered to report to their stations, a young 30-something-year-old lieutenant got up and reported to the station in Griffith Stadium, and that lieutenant was John F. Kennedy. The players for the Redskins knew something was up because they kept hearing his announcements all through the game. The photographers that were covering back then, if you take a look at these old photos, you see these guys with their big flash bulbs and everything in either end zone covering the game. By halftime, there was only one photographer left in the whole stadium. Everybody was gone. Somebody knew something was up. Nobody was telling anybody anything. The owner of the Redskins would not allow the attack on Pearl Harbor to interrupt a good game. There was no announcement from the stadium. They went out and the cab drivers were saying, hey, they bombed Pearl Harbor, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. When they got in the car, some of the cars had radios. Everybody had their doors open. People were huddling around cars outside of Griffith Stadium. trying to get the news of that time, and it was all over the radio by that time. The game got out around 5 o'clock.
Japanese bombers started bombing Fort William McKinley.
Clyde Sugar of the alignment on the Washington Redskins got his linemen together in Washington, D.C. They were so outraged at what happened that they got the Washington Redskins linemen to march down to the Japanese embassy saying, hey, you want to take us on? You want to fight us? Let's fight right now. Come on, let's fight us right now. There were 600 National Football League players that served in World War II. 330 plus served as officers in World War II. So you have nearly 51% of the NFL that's in the officer class in World War II. You know, World War II took these men all over the world. You know, they have probably ventured maybe only 20 miles outside. Yeah, I love it, and this is a scrapbook that I have that somebody gave to me. This is a scrapbook of the Eagles and the Redskins game on December 7th, 1941, kept by one of the former players. And the family gave that one page to me. They kept the rest of it, but they gave that one page to me as a thank you for not letting people forget them. I just love the story of the entire offensive line going to the Japanese embassy. Let's bring it on. Let's go right now. I just love that. I just think, how American is that, you know? So, you know, I love that. Go ahead and go to the next one. Now, a few of the stories I want to share with you, there's so many that we can do. I mean, you can talk about Tom Landry. You can talk about Tom Harmon, you know, and I will say this about Tom Harmon, even though he's not part of this, he should be, but we don't have enough time. But you know, Tom Harmon, he played 1 year he's a legend in Michigan, number 98. He's old 98. Very few people get to wear that number. But Tom Harmon was a P-38 pilot, and he fought in World War II, was shot down over China, parachuted in, and he called them the Underground Railroad, the Chinese Underground Railroad, that got him out, just like Doolittle's Raiders, they got him out. And as he was parachuting down, Zeros were shooting at him. He was pretended that he was dead, but he made it, and they rescued him out. He came back and played 1 season with the Rams, and then he became the Rams announcer. Tom Harmon was the voice of the Rams for many seasons, was voice of USC Sports for many seasons, along with Tom Kelly, if you remember them, and all that. Harmon was, but we all know his son Mark Harmon, All-American quarterback at UCLA. We also know his daughter married Ricky Nelson. His wife was, I believe, Miss America. You know, Tom Harmon's wife was Miss America, an actress. And his son-in-law was, maybe you remember him, John DeLorean. All right, so the Tom Harmon family is pretty connected, you know, and we see Mark Harmon on CSI or all the TV shows that he's been on for years. But there are a few players here I think we really need to take a look at. And then, a man is not dead until he's forgotten. That picture right there is Mats Tonelli. And Dr. Dave's let me wear his POW bracelet today because his story affected me. It impacted me so much because he served in World War II. He was artillery. He was sent to Corregidor in 1942. He was there when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. He was there when they bombed the Philippines on December 8th, 9th, 1941. And, you know, Corregidor fell, and it was the biggest surrender in the history of the United States military forces. And, you know, those men were marched to captivity in the Bataan Death March. Mats Tonelli played football at the University of Notre Dame, number 58. He's a legend. He was recruited by USC. He wanted to go to USC and play there. His mom, a good Catholic girl, said, no, you're not going to go to California. It's just going to screw you up. You're going to stay here. You're going to go to Notre Dame. You're going to play it. Somebody's coming to meet you tonight. And who walked in the door of their home? Elmer Layton, the head coach of Notre Dame, the future commissioner of the NFL, walks in and he goes and plays for Notre Dame. I believe it was 1937, Mats breaks loose in Notre Dame, breaks loose for a 57-yard run against Southern California to beat the Trojans. And it was a satisfying victory, as always it is for Notre Dame to beat USC, but for him it made him a legend. Sitting in the crowd that day were a contingent of 20 or 30 exchange students, Japanese exchange students that were attending the University of Southern California. When Mats graduated Notre Dame, he got his class ring. And he wore that class ring with pride. When he surrendered, and they were walking back, a Japanese soldier came up with his bayonet in his neck and said, give me your ring. He said, no. And his friends were like, give him your ring, or you're going to be dead. So he took his ring off. That was everything to him. He gave him his ring, and they started marching. and a Japanese cavalry officer goes riding by with it on the end of his sword was the head of a decapitated American soldier. And Mats looked back to the rest of his boys and said, "Boys, I think we're in trouble." And they were. A little bit later, a Japanese officer comes up to Mats and he says, in perfect English, "Did somebody take something from you?" He goes, "Yeah, I took my class ring away from Notre Dame." He goes, "I saw you play that day in South Bend. You had that 57-yard run, you beat us, you're a hell of a football player, here's your ring." And he gave him his ring. You wouldn't expect that because all we hear are the torture, all we hear, and it was that bad. But there was that little bit of humanity in that one moment. And Mats Tonelli said he kept it in his soap dish, and he kept it in other places too that they didn't inspect, so he could have that ring. And he brought that ring home with him, and he had that ring all the way to the time he died. If we go, and we'll let Mats tell it in his own words, a little clip here for you, if we take a look here. Now, wait, real quick. That middle picture, if you've ever seen the movie, Louis Zamperini story, if you've seen that movie, that's Mats. They were in the same facilities. They just never hooked up with each other until later on. But Mats, when he was about ready to commit suicide, he thought about it a few times. When he went to his new camp in the Philippines, when he was being held, they gave him a hat with that number on it. The number was 58. His number from Notre Dame. And that gave him hope. And he felt like, I still got hope. So he put that cap on, and he went on to come back. He played one season with the Chicago Cardinals. And after that, he became a politician in Cook County in Chicago. Yeah, go on to the next one and see if we can see the clip.
The winter of life stirs memories. Mats Tonelli recalls kindness shining in a dark place.
American and Filipino troops are reported making a grim last-ditch stand at home.
56 years ago today, in 1942, Tonelli was an army sergeant, only 25 years old, battling the Japanese in a steamy Philippine jungle.
We knew we couldn't win. We didn't have ammunition. The ammunition that we did have was old and there were duds.
Only 2 grenades in 25 worked. Finally, 12,000 GIs gave up. The largest single surrender in American history. Men too weak to defend themselves were made to march 70 miles.
You'd see them get shot. You'd see them get killed.
It was a death march. 10,000 American and Filipino soldiers would die. On the first day, a Japanese guard demanded Mats' class ring.
He kept pointing at it, and I said, "No, I'm not going to give it to you." And a couple of guys said, "Mats, give him the ring. He's going to kill you."
The soldier pressed his bayonet into Tonelli's neck. A life and death test of wills. Mats surrendered the ring.
The Bataan Death March is not known for any act of kindness, but there was one, because of something that happened 5 years before here in Notre Dame Stadium.
Mats Tonelli was a fullback then with dazzling speed. 2 minutes left in the game against arch-rival University of Southern California. He ran 76 yards for a touchdown. It was a moment one USC student from Japan would never forget. 5 years later, on that jungle path, the student, now a Japanese Army officer, recognized Tonelli.
And he said, "Did one of my men take anything from you?" And I said, "Yes, he did." He reached in his pocket and he said, "Is this it?"
Tonelli's Notre Dame ring,
He gave me the ring back.
because he remembered one glorious run. The officer did something very special. He gave Mats back a piece of his life.
When you're talking about a war, you're talking about life.
That extraordinary gift helped Mats do something most of his buddies did not. He survived the ordeal with a ring and the memory of a single act of kindness. Bob Dotson, NBC News.
I think that is a remarkable man, and very few people know about him. There's my classes, and like I said, I still teach after 35 years of teaching. I still teach. My kids can all tell you about Ted Williams. They can tell you about Mats. They can tell you about all the players because they understand the cost of, they can't fathom, why would they do that? They ask why. And then the fact that the people are asking why just shows us how much work we have ahead of us. The answer is why not? It's a great country to fight for and preserve it. So we're working on it. But another one, this one is personal to me because Al Blozes played for the New York Giants. You take a look at him, he's 6'6", so automatically I can relate to that. But you know, he fought in Eastern France. That's where my dad fought. He was in the division right next to my dad as they were campaigning in the Battle of the Bulge. There's two Battle of the Bulges a lot of people don't know about. You have the Battle of the Bulge that you're all familiar with, the 101st Airborne, Bastogne and all that. There's another segment of the Battle of the Bulge called Operation Northwind in English. And that was another attempted breakthrough by the Germans to break the American lines. My dad's division, the 70th Division, and his division right to the left of them were holding the line. He was a lieutenant, and his first sergeant and one of his 30 cal machine gunners was missing. So he went back to find them. You don't do that. But he did, because he was an officer and he cared for his men, and he knew from his football days that you should put others ahead of yourself. Good leadership is you let your troops eat first. There was a gentleman by the name of James Gavin who jumped with the 82nd Airborne, was commanding officer, and he says, you jump first and you eat last. Take care of your troops. He knew that, but it ended up costing his life, and they didn't find him. He was missing in action for a long time. They finally found him, and he's buried in France right there, and we have that picture right there of his gravesite. He played for the New York Giants. Go ahead, the next one. Now this guy is awesome. I got to interview him. How many of you know the story of Concrete Charlie or Chuck Bednarik? Anybody know who Chuck Bednarik is? A legendary Philadelphia Eagles player. He played both sides of the ball. One of the last two ones to do it. And until the Eagles won the Super Bowl a few years back, they won the NFL championship. There was no Super Bowl then. They won the NFL championship. He was the last one to be able to do it. He played both sides. He hit hard. He played tough. He was a waist gunner on a B-17. And he flew 30 combat missions over Germany. And this is one of the stories that he told me. Now, since this is an air museum, you guys can call BS on this or not, but he said, we had a gunner that got a shell fragment that came through the side, because you can go look at the plane right here and you can see how thin those aluminum hulls are. And it got poked and he was cut and he was bleeding. So they didn't have a surgeon on there to deal with that. He could bleed to death. So Chuck goes, I just got an idea. We pried it back and we stuck his leg out the window, or out the hole. And it froze it. And it saved his life. And it saved his leg. So after we got out of combat and we came down and it would start bleeding again, we were able to have the time to treat it. So he said he would cut him right here. He said we always called him a half-ass gunner after that. But he said that was just, you just think on your feet. That's what you do. You know, and I found that to be just typical American resilience and, you know, making something work. But like I said, he was a waist gunner. He came up, he picked up his leg. He was legendary for his hit. On the picture on the left, laying there on his back, is Frank Gifford, if you know who Frank Gifford is. All right? And Frank Gifford, who played with the Giants, Chuck Bednarik just came and laid him out. After that picture, Frank Gifford didn't play for 2 seasons. Because Chuck, that's when he's standing over him and he says, this game is over. And it wasn't a cheap hit. It was a hard hit, but it wasn't a cheap hit. All right? And do you guys know who Frank Gifford married, right? Who? Kathy Lee Gifford. Never bring up the name Chuck Bednarik to Kathy Lee Gifford. You know, as nice as she is. And my sister knows her really well. And so we were one time and she says, oh, you're writing, are you going to put Frank in there? And I went, no, because he wasn't in the war like these guys were. I have Chuck Bednarik in there. She goes, you know better than to bring that name up to me, young man. And I'm like, well, anyway, but that picture's right there. The other idea I like is they're playing the championship game against the Packers. And the Packers were 6 yards away from taking the game. And back then, stopping the clock isn't like it is now. So the fullback had the ball, and he got 6 yards. He's laying there. Chuck Bednarik just went over and sat on him. He sat on him, he goes, the clock runs down, it was like 10 seconds. He goes, okay, you can get up now. Game over if you want. There was no flag, there was no this or that. You're just laying on him. And he was so big and burly and tough. And you can look up his pictures. His ring, his fingers were broken. They all go in opposite directions. He didn't care. He just loved playing the game. And we did a great interview with him for the World War II Museum. And I'm gonna be posting that pretty soon. But anyway, I wanted to go over that. Let's go to the next one. We have Maurice Fritzy Britt. Now, obviously, I have one of his leather helmets in my home from the NFL. But he played for the Lions, and he was an amazing player, but All-American in college. Everybody knew who he was. He earned the Medal of Honor in Italy. In one combat operation, he was able to use it. We have it up there. Britt had thrown 32 grenades in that fight to hold Mount Rotondo in Italy. There was a causeway into Rome. And he individually himself threw those grenades to protect his platoon that was out in front of him. Then he got in front of him. He was bleeding. Took shell fragments. He was able to rescue them and pull them off the line. And for that, he earned the Medal of Honor. Now, a few days later, they were in an exposed position, and the German 88 anti-aircraft guns were shooting at them again. So the first thing you want to be able to do in artillery is you want to be able to spot where they're coming from, so you know where you destroy them, where your return fire should go. And the Germans are really good at hiding. So what did he do? He exposed himself and went into an open field and directed fire at him. He had the antenna up on the walkie-talkie. He was talking, the phone and directing the artillery fire. Well, the Germans then trained their fire on him. He ran off the field into a house, but they exposed them. The artillery spotter planes, Piper Cubs above, saw where they were and took the guns out. When they arrived, sitting in that house that had been hit by a shell, was Maurice Britt sitting there, holding his severed arm in his hand, or his arm in his other hand, saying, "I knew it would end this way." That's what he said. He came back and picked up his career in politics in Arkansas, and he served in leadership in Arkansas, not as governor, lieutenant governor, and made it all the way through until he was eventually pushed out of politics by Bill Clinton. Small world. Go ahead to the next one. Now, Jack Loomis, he earned the Medal of Honor at Iwo Jima. He also played professional baseball, but he's known as being one hell of a New York Giant. And let's go ahead and we'll let Keith Olbermann tell you his story.
Souvenir caps. And we should remember Jack Loomis of Baylor in the 1941 New York Giants. He was an end. He played 9 NFL games without much distinction, caught 1 pass for 5 yards. 40 days after he and the Giants lost the championship game that year to the Bears, he enlisted in the Marines. President Abraham Lincoln established the Medal of Honor. It is the greatest recognition this country can bestow on those we remember on Memorial Day. In the more than 153 years of military action the medal covers, only 621 have been posthumously awarded. In all our history, only 621. 14 of them in one battle in World War II, Iwo Jima. You can turn to any page in the book of citations for the Medal of Honor and find yourself weeping within paragraphs or seconds. This was the citation for Jack Loomis of Baylor and the 1941 New York Giants and Iwo Jima. Loomis Andrew Jackson, awarded May 5th, 1946, posthumously. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty as leader of a rifle platoon attached to the 2nd Battalion, 27th Marines, 5th Marine Division in action against enemy Japanese forces on Iwo Jima in the Volcano Islands, 8 March 1945. Resuming his assault tactics with bold decision after fighting without respite for 2 days and nights, First Lieutenant Loomis slowly advanced his platoon against an enemy deeply entrenched in a network of mutually supporting positions. Suddenly halted by a terrific concentration of hostile fire, he unhesitatingly moved forward of his front lines in an effort to neutralize the Japanese position. Although knocked to the ground when an enemy grenade exploded close by, he immediately recovered himself and again moving forward, despite the intensified barrage, quickly located, attacked, and destroyed the occupied emplacement. Instantly taken under fire by the garrison of a supporting pillbox and further assailed by the slashing fury of hostile rifle fire, he fell under the impact of a second enemy grenade. But courageously disregarding painful shoulder wounds, staunchly continued his heroic one-man assault and charged the second pillbox, annihilating all the occupants. Subsequently returning to his platoon position, he fearlessly traversed his lines under fire, encouraged his men to advance, and directing the fire of supporting tanks against other stubbornly holding Japanese emplacements. held up again by a devastating barrage. He again moved into the open, rushed a third heavily fortified installation, and killed the defending troops. Determined to crush all resistance, he led his men indomitably, personally attacking foxholes and spider traps with his carbine, and systematically reducing the fanatic opposition until, stepping on a landmine, he sustained fatal wounds. As a note, the citation omits that the landmine blew off Jack Loomis's legs. He was still conscious when he died at an aid station. To resume. By his outstanding valor, skilled tactics, and tenacious perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds, First Lieutenant Loomis had inspired his stout-hearted Marines to continue the relentless drive northward, thereby contributing materially to the success of his regimental mission. His dauntless leadership and unwavering devotion to duty throughout sustain and enhance the highest traditions of the U.S. Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life in the service of his country.
Now, one of the things about Jack Loomis, when they took him back to the aid station, he was alive, and his friends and his loved ones were around him, and he said, "What do you want us to say? What do you want us to do?" And what he said was, "Tell the Giants they lost one hell of an end." And he died. That's the last thing he said. Tell the Giants they lost one hell of an end. Still thinking about football. Still thinking about what could have been. Jack Loomis is amazing. Now, Joe Foss. Now, why do I have Joe Foss up here? Not only is he a Medal of Honor recipient for what he did during the Battle of Guadalcanal and Cactus Air Force and shooting down a record number of planes in a week, becoming an ace, almost an ace in a day and an ace in a week. Shot down 23 Japanese airplanes, damaged more. Shot down 3 more Japanese airplanes on the 15th and 43, flying off the Henderson Field at Guadalcanal. Then he went on to found the American Football League, the AFL. Eventually became what we know as the AFC today. But on that letter, if you look at that letter dated December 6, 1963, "Dear Pete Rozelle, much talking has been done late by the public and the press as to when the American and National Football Leagues will meet in a championship game. I feel strongly that the time has arrived for the inauguration of such an annual game. Therefore, on behalf of the AFL, I reissue an official challenge to the NFL for the first game to be played at the conclusion of the 64 season with the winners of the respective league divisional playoffs opposing one another." Joe Foss gave you the Super Bowl. That's the document that created the Super Bowl. So we got that going. Was it next week? All right, next weekend, isn't it? Yeah, so the reason Joe Foss is so important is because of that document there. When I was in Canton, Ohio, I got to hold that document, got to look at it and hold it and see it. Sometimes when you get to hold things, it makes it so real, you know, you get to experience it. But just to see that and know the multi-billion-dollar industry, what that's become. Joe Foss is in the Hall of Fame. Pete Rozelle is in the Hall of Fame. The elder-laden, the gentleman who saved the league, isn't there in that box. Let me go ahead and go to the next one. Now, this guy, if you ever watched Johnny Carson, he was on Johnny Carson as much as Bob Uecker was, if you know who Bob Uecker is, you know. But Art Donovan, he was a machine gunner, he fought at Saipan, and as you can tell, he was a wrestler, he was a boxer, and on all of that is too. And one of the things about fighting, when the battle wore off at Saipan and they were doing occupation cleanup forces there, they had a boxing championship. Well, what Art didn't know, and I think I had one of the last interviews, his daughter told me, I think his last interview was with me before he passed away. And the reason he did it is because he liked that he was talking to a school teacher. And we were talking, and Art was telling me in his frail voice how much he loved being a Marine, how much he loved his country and everything. But he said the best time in the service was I was getting ready to go into a boxing match. And the referee of that boxing match turned around and said, "Hello, son," and it was his dad, who was an official boxing referee in the United States. His dad was there. And I asked Art, I go, "How'd the fight go?" He goes, "I got my ass kicked because I was too busy crying the whole time because my dad was there." You know, and I just couldn't, but he said, "It's okay, I got back up, I made it good later on." But, he was just, he couldn't get over that. And I said, "Well, what do you think I could tell these kids today? The football teams, the people that go out and take for granted everything that they have, what do you think I could tell them?" And that's his quote. That's my favorite quote of this project. "The reason I can play above the grass is because of those who lie beneath it." I think that puts it pretty good. We made that into a plaque That hangs above our door at our high school football team. And they go out, just like it says, play like a champion for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Instead, our high school, Serrano High School, goes out and takes the field, patting that sign. And there's a picture of Art Donovan there too. A Baltimore Colt. Sorry, I'm just going to call them Baltimore Colts, right? To me, they're always going to be the Baltimore Colts. We can go to the next one. Now, the story of Vietnam, Bob Kelsow was an American tackle, All-American at Oklahoma. And back in the 60s, you had to go ROTC. You had military training that you had to do. You had to report to that. The reason I know my brothers had to do that too. In high school, you had to take junior ROTC. You had to do those kind of things. Did anybody take junior ROTC in here when you were in school at all? Anybody just curious about that? Bob Kelsow did, and he performed well at it. He was an All-American. He got drafted. He's going to play with the Bills. He goes and plays with the Bills and everything like that. But the service time comes up, and he's called. He could have got out of it. And everybody was encouraging him to get out of it. He even got a call from a longtime Philadelphia Phillies. Maybe you've ever heard of him. His name is Todd McGraw. A relief pitcher was exposed to Agent Orange and ended up actually killing him later on in life. But he was saying, son, you don't have to go. And he goes, I'm an officer in ROTC. That's what I'm going to do. I can't tell my country no. I can tell the Bills no. I can't tell my country no. So he went and he served he was in a forward base. You take a look, fire base ripcord on a hill in South Vietnam. And there was a lot of BC fire coming in and everything like that. There was a helicopter that was landing. And what was on that helicopter? Mail. His wife was pregnant. And he kept wondering if he was, this is the letters coming that says I'm going to be a dad. And he ran out to provide cover for the helicopter, and he ran out and was killed. In the mail bag that day there was no messages for him. But 2 days later, his son was born. And Bob would send home, remember those reel-to-reel, little small reel-to-reel tape decks that you can record on. And he made recordings of his messages to his daughter and to his newborn child and his wife, telling him, I love you, I'll be home, and all that. They still have those tapes. And you can hear his dad's voice. But his son on the far right there, who looks just like his dad to me, but his son on the far right there lived his life with guilt that his dad died trying to get a letter and find out if he was born. He was somehow blaming himself. And when they found those tapes, he didn't feel that way anymore. That brought closure to him. And so now they embrace their father's memory, the Kelsow Foundation and everything like that. A truly brave American. Sports Illustrated did a terrific article on it, and if you ever want to look that up. Let's go ahead next. Now, this is one of my favorite stories, and we're almost done. I'll try to keep it within the hour. Thanks for your patience with me. But Pete Rozelle was in the Navy in World War II. Pete Rozelle went to Compton High School, graduated Compton High School. Pete Rozelle's best friend was Duke Snider, and they graduated together, played sports together in Compton High School down here. Well, anyway, Duke Snider went in the Navy. He was on a submarine tender. Pete Rozelle went into the Navy overseas, and they all saw the intensity of the Japanese forces and their disregard, or let's say, of civility in combat. It was mean. It was a mean war. If you want to see the difference, watch Band of Brothers and watch The Pacific. If you've seen those two HBO specials, and you'll see the difference in the war. You'll see it's a totally different war. But Pete Rozelle, in 1975, the Jets were playing in Shea Stadium, and who comes to the game but Emperor Hirohito? Emperor Hirohito and his wife are arriving at the game because they want to see the famous Joe Namath play. So they went to Shea Stadium to see this game. So of course, the news, the media, the United Nations, I think he was speaking at the United Nations, if I remember right, he was going to be. So he's in town, and so he wanted to go see this famous, because football wasn't really popular in Japan. Baseball was, but football really wasn't. And so he wanted to see what's going on. So Pete Rozelle was there with his wife and his son, and of course all the entourage of American diplomacy was there. Emperor Hirohito came, and Pete Rozelle let the other dignitaries welcome him. He said, I just couldn't shake his hand. And so there were a lot of American veterans that felt Hirohito was a war criminal. But we left him in because of the whole keeping Japan in our orbit and keeping it secure, MacArthur keeping it secure so it didn't fall into the hands of communist expansion and all that. But Pete Rozelle couldn't do that. He just couldn't do that. He saw the faces of people that he went to school with, and he knew, and he just couldn't do that. Well, this is when the war ended for him. Pete Rozelle, even though this was 1975, that's the day the war ended for him, was this day. He was looking out the window, and Hirohito said, "Can I borrow your field glasses?" So those field glasses right there are Pete Rozelle's binoculars there. And he's watching, it was time to go, but he said, "No, I want to see," Hirohito said, "I want to see Joe Namath throw one more touchdown pass. I want to see this. This is crazy, I love it." Then Pete Rozelle heard laughter. And he recognized the laughter was his son. He turned around, and sitting at the foot of the Japanese emperor was his son eating a hot dog, talking to the Japanese emperor, and they were both laughing together. And it was at that moment Pete Rozelle said the war ended for him. And he went over and shook his hand. I thought that was a cool healing moment, brought about by a little kid who didn't know any different. Just that he got the Emperor of Japan right here, and then he took a bite of hot dog and didn't like it. But anyway, I thought that was cool. And then go to the next one. Now, I'd like to end today. We all know about Pat Tillman, or we should know about Pat Tillman giving up his service, giving up his career with the Cardinals. Millions and millions of dollars, and a potential multi-million-dollar deal with the St. Louis Rams at the time, to go and play in the NFL. But he knew better. He saw his country was attacked on September 11th. But the Tillman family has a little bit more relationship to the military than that. Pat Tillman saw our country was attacked. He thought that was what all Americans need to do. He's going to sign up and he's going to serve. He's going to go in. He's going to go in the Rangers. He's going to be the best that he can possibly be. His brother Kevin joined up too. Kevin was a AAA baseball player for the Minnesota Twins. And he gave up his Twins career to go serve our country too. They were even in the same unit, although they were not fighting together because the Army rules family doesn't serve together, going all the way back to the Sullivans of World War II on the Navy. But anyway, we all know that Pat Tillman was killed. Originally we were told Pat Tillman was killed in combat. And the American military, the leadership at that time, if you remember, it was a good patriotic message and it looked good. That wasn't the truth. He was killed by friendly fire, if you know that. But they covered it up, and I'm not going to get into all the finger pointing and blaming and stuff like that. There's a lot to go around. I'll let the family do that. But what inspired Pat Tillman to serve is the fact that his great-grandfather was killed aboard the USS Arizona at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. He knew that his country, when attacked, needed to fight and needed to be protected and saved. He went into it for all the right reasons. He isn't John Wayne. In fact, he's very much of a progressive, left-leaning, liberal institution, the Pat Tillman Foundation, which is his choice. That's fine. But what he was fighting for was the preservation of us to be who we want to be and what we are, to think and speak and act, and to be educated and to know. And this is one of the quotes that I love. If you can see it, it's the curiosity that leads you to question and answer, or curiosity you to question and answer a higher calling. It is fierce, faster, stronger. It's the voice inside that keeps you going, and it never stops. We all are inspired by something in us that keeps us going. I never saw that demonstrated better than my mom, who had her son serving in Vietnam, who had her husband fighting in Korea, who had her husband fighting in World War II. And I would say, "Mom, what is it that just keeps you going?" And she goes, "Oh, honey, it's the welcome home that makes it all worth it." You know, and so I can bring this to a close today by reminding us freedom isn't free. That Elmer League needs to be in the Hall of Fame. That we have a great sport in football that exemplifies teamwork, camaraderie, hope, and dedication and discipline that truly makes our country great. It's a great sport. The Super Bowl was saved by a World War II vet, Joe Foss. Don't ever forget that. Thank you for your time today. Have a good one.
And do you have time for some Q&A?
For some, oh sure, it's already hit an hour, and I know how. I teach students all the time, so they're waiting for the bell.
Oh,
so
we got all day. If you got a question, raise your hand. I'll bring in the microphone. Oh, hold on. Thank you.
The letter said that he was requesting the first Super Bowl to start in
after the 64 season. It
Right.
didn't start until 2 years later. Was there a reason why they couldn't get it started sooner?
Because Pete Rozelle and Joe Foss didn't get along all that well. There was a little bit, how are we going to, it gets all that down to money. It comes down to money. And how are we going to do this? And recognizing that the AFL, or as we know, the AFC, is this really legitimate? You know, it was territorial because NFL was this, and you start getting into the AFC, and you start getting into a lot of these new teams, you know, Broncos, things like that, and these newer teams. So they're really trying to cement the relationship, and so they didn't really trust each other. How are we going to share the monies? And so it wasn't until finally Joe Foss said, screw it, let's just all be in one National Football League. Like the MLB is with National American League, let's do the same thing. So they negotiated it and they got that going. And so that's the best answer I can give you to that. It always comes down to money. And the other thing, credit. It comes down to credit too. Pete Rozelle gets credit. We forget about Joe Foss. That's why making sure. I got to meet Joe Foss. And if you want to know about Joe Foss, he was a governor of Montana. And he had these boy state, these young men that were mentored by the governor of Montana, you know, to go in careers in media, broadcasting, politics, whatever. And Joe Foss, if you know, Joe Foss is a very much of a pro-Second Amendment, Republican, thing like that. But he was mentoring a really young man he thought would go far, and that guy was named Tom Brokaw. It's kind of cool.
Anyone else? Oh,
Okay. Yes.
Is it on?
Yep.
Let me introduce myself, Mike Vesuvius. My question to you, you talk about all the sports. You ever thought about combining some of the sports with some of the movie stars that surf?
Well, there is a fabulous book on movie stars that serve. You can get that because we were talking about Clark Gable as a waste gunner. We were talking about Jimmy Stewart and all of that. You know,
From Gilligan Island?
Sure.
He was wounded really bad, and you never talked about it.
No, and there's a lot of, well, we did a big exhibit on Hollywood Goes to War at the World War II Museum, but there is a book on Hollywood at War, and you could go and look up everybody, even going all the way back to World War I.
Yes.
You could take a look at, I believe, Buster Keaton in the military. Now, all these, you know, have I written that? No, but it's already been done. So it's out there.
Yeah, a lot of them give up their careers to go to the military.
Oh, without a doubt. And one of the things that, you know, if you think about it, in the entertainment industry, you know, I think, where's your Bob Hope station? Down there, isn't it? Yeah, my sister did a series of tours. And my sister was Miss California and then second runner-up in Miss America in 1969-70. And they did tours with Bob Hope. And one of the things that Bob Hope said, I got to meet Bob Hope briefly, who was an amazing person. But he was talking, I said, did it hurt your career? And he goes, yeah, of course it did. But who cares? America's worth that. I don't have a career without America, you know. And talking about, there's a great book called Letters to Bob, and it's all the servicemen's letters to Bob Hope. If you ever want to read it, it's a great book, Letters to Bob. But there is a book on Hollywood at War. It's really good. I'm working on a new book right now, another baseball book with a lot of new stories that I found. When I was doing all my baseball research, I kept busting into football everywhere I went. So I'm like, I gotta write about football. So we got baseball goes to war, football goes to war, everybody's joking, what am I gonna do next? Curling goes to war, tennis goes to war, but tennis did go to war. And soccer went to war, you know, so, but mine's not on that. My next book is on the time I was arrested and held by the Soviets in East Berlin. When I was, that was a bad day.
Anyone else with a question? By the way, Todd will be back in April, about the beginning of the baseball season, and he'll be doing his program on Baseball Went to War. So encourage you all to come to that. He mentioned his sister, Susan Anton. She was Miss California in 1970. She was a finalist in the Miss America contest that year. And later on, as he mentioned, she went on the Miss America tour to Vietnam, to the various bases. March 29th, another program we're having at 1 o'clock on that Saturday. That happens to be National Vietnam Veterans Day. And so that program will be Welcome Home Vietnam Vets. How many Vietnam vets do we have here? Raise your hand, please. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we would love for you all to come to that. Susan will be here, and she'll be talking a little bit about her tour. And we have another speaker who wrote a book. It's called Snake Pilot. One of our volunteers, Randy Zahn, was a Cobra pilot. He flew Susan from his base at Phúc Vinh back to Da Nang. And they will be meeting each other after 55 years. So encourage you all to come to see that, to that program as well. So anyways, and
Real quick, if people are asking about the book, it does exist. You can go to Amazon and get it. There's plenty of them out there. So you go to Amazon and get it. You can go to Amazon and get When Baseball Went to War II. The Baseball Went to War book, I really fought hard for it because it was published back in different technology days. So inside the jacket is a CD it's made to look like a V-disc record from World War II. And it has all my interviews with Yogi Berra and Bob Feller and Ted Williams and everybody on it, so you can hear that on your own. So if you want to, but they're available. I don't see any, Bob Feller said if you're going into writing a book to make money, you're stupid, don't do it. And I didn't go in to write this. I did it as an assignment to make sure we don't forget. And that's why I did it. So if you still want to get it, it's out there. I don't see anything of it other than the fact that some people still care.